Rain slammed against the windshield in thick, restless waves, turning the city into a blur of flickering lights and shadows. The nearly empty night bus groaned as it moved through the storm, its engine tired, its path unnoticed. Behind the wheel sat Keanu Reeves, quiet, focused, invisible to the world. To everyone else, he was just another worn-out driver finishing another long shift. Nothing about him stood out until a small voice broke through the silence. "Mister, please don't stop." He glanced into the rearview mirror. A little girl stood there, clutching a faded teddy bear, her eyes wide with fear. In the seat behind her, a woman lay motionless, her head tilted awkwardly against the glass. The bus slowed slightly at a red light, but the girl shook her head, tears spilling fast now. "My mom won't wake up, please, we need help." For a split second, time seemed to freeze. The storm, the traffic, the world outside, all waiting for his next move. Then something shifted inside him. Without a word, he pressed down on the accelerator, ignoring the red light as the bus surged forward into the rain. Horns blared, tires screeched, but his hands stayed steady, his eyes sharp, his mind calm in a way that didn't belong to an ordinary man. And somewhere, just a few cars behind, a phone camera started recording, capturing the moment that, by morning, would make the entire world ask one question. Who was that bus driver? Every morning before the city even considered waking up, Keanu Reeves was already on the road. The depot lights buzzed faintly overhead as he checked the mirrors of bus 47, his movements calm, almost ritualistic. He wore the same faded jacket every day, its fabric softened by years of use, its pockets carrying little more than a pair of gloves, and something folded carefully out of sight. The other drivers barely noticed him. To them, he was just John, the quiet one who never complained, never joked, never stayed longer than necessary. In a world that thrived on noise and attention, he had mastered the art of disappearing. And somehow, that suited him just fine. His route was one of the least desirable in the city. Long stretches of empty streets, overlooked neighborhoods, and passengers who rarely spoke. But Keanu didn't mind. Silence, to him, wasn't uncomfortable, it was familiar. It gave him space to think, or sometimes, to not think at all. There was a steadiness in the way he drove, a quiet precision that felt almost out of place for someone in such an ordinary job. Every stop was exact. Every turn was smooth. It wasn't something you'd notice right away. But if you paid attention long enough, you'd realize this wasn't just routine. It was discipline, the kind built over years of something deeper, something he never talked about. And yet, despite the distance he kept from the world, there was one small part of his day that never went unnoticed. Every morning at exactly 7:05, the bus slowed near Maple Street. And every morning, without fail, a little girl stood there waiting. Her name was Anna. She wore oversized shoes that looked like they belonged to someone else, and she always held the same worn teddy bear, it seems barely holding together. The first time he saw her, she had simply waved, a small, uncertain gesture from the sidewalk. He hadn't responded, not because he didn't care, but because somewhere along the way he had forgotten how to. But she waved again the next day, and the next, until one morning, almost without thinking, he lifted his hand just enough to return it. It was subtle, barely anything, but to her it was everything. Days turned into weeks, and that silent exchange became their unspoken ritual. Sometimes she would smile a little wider. Sometimes she would step closer to the curb as the bus approached. And one morning, she did something different. She stepped on board. Keanu glanced at her briefly, his expression calm but curious. She didn't say much. Instead, she walked up to him and held out a folded piece of paper, her small hands slightly trembling. "This is for you," she said softly. He hesitated for a moment before taking it. Inside was a drawing, simple, uneven lines forming the shape of a bus, with a man sitting behind the wheel. But behind that man were wings. Big, uneven, childlike wings. Keanu stared at it longer than he should have. "You drew this?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her eyes hopeful. "You're like a hero," she whispered. For a brief second, something flickered across his face, Something warmer, softer, almost forgotten, but it disappeared just as quickly as it came. He folded the paper carefully and placed it inside his jacket, close to his chest, as if it mattered more than he wanted to admit. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but sincere. She smiled, satisfied, and returned to her seat. From that day on, the bus didn't feel quite as empty, and neither did he. But what Aina didn't know, what no one knew, was that the man she called a hero had spent years trying to leave that part of himself behind. Because sometimes, being a hero doesn't feel like a gift. Sometimes, it feels like a burden you carry in silence. The storm had grown heavier by the minute, swallowing the city in sheets of rain and distant thunder. Streetlights flickered as if struggling to stay alive, their reflections stretching across the soaked asphalt like broken lines of gold. Inside the bus, the air felt different now. Tense, uncertain. Keanu Reeves kept his eyes locked on the road, but his mind had already shifted gears. The little girl's voice still echoed in his head. "My mom won't wake up." In the rearview mirror, he saw her again. Aina, clutching her teddy bear, shaking her mother gently, whispering something through tears. The woman hadn't moved, not even once. Keanu's grip on the steering wheel tightened, but his face remained calm. That calm wasn't normal. It wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. The nearest hospital was 12 minutes away in normal traffic. Tonight, with flooded roads and stalled vehicles, it could take 20, maybe more. Too long, way too long. His eyes scanned the streets ahead, mapping routes instinctively, measuring distance, risk, time. A red light glowed at the next intersection, cars slowly crawling across. The bus began to decelerate, but then Aina's voice broke again, weaker this time, almost a whisper. "Please don't let her go." That was the moment something inside him snapped, not emotionally, but decisively. He pressed his foot down hard. The engine roared, protesting as the bus surged forward, cutting through the intersection just as horns exploded around him. A car skidded to a halt inches away. Another driver shouted, but the sound was swallowed by thunder. Inside the bus, one of the passengers jolted awake. "Hey, where are you doing?" he yelled, gripping the seat in front of him. But Keanu didn't respond. His eyes were sharper now, movements more precise. He wasn't driving anymore. He was navigating, like someone trained to operate under pressure where mistakes cost lives. He swerved past a stalled vehicle, cutting into a narrow side street most drivers wouldn't even notice. Rainwater splashed violently against the windows as the bus pushed forward, faster than it had any right to go. Every turn was exact. Every second mattered. In the mirror, Aina's small face looked terrified, but there was something else there too. Trust. She believed him. Halfway down the street, flashing blue lights suddenly lit up the road ahead. A police barricade blocked the path. Flooding had shut down the main route. An officer stepped forward, raising his hand. "Stop. Roads close." But Keanu didn't slow down, not immediately. His eyes scanned left, then right. There was a gap. Tight, risky, almost impossible for a bus that size. The kind of move no sane driver would attempt. The officer's voice grew louder. "I said stop." The bus finally slowed just enough to make it seem like he would comply. Then, in one fluid motion, Keanu turned the wheel sharply, guiding the bus through the narrow gap between the barricade and a stranded car. The side mirror scraped with a loud crack, but the bus made it through. The officer spun around in shock. "What the?" Inside, chaos erupted. The passenger shouted again, now panicked. "You're gonna get us killed." But Keanu's voice finally cut through the noise, calm, firm, undeniable. "Sit down." Two simple words. No anger, no panic, just authority. And somehow it worked. The man fell silent, because there was something in that tone, something that didn't belong to a bus driver, something that felt experienced, controlled, like he had been here before. As the bus burst back onto the main road, the hospital came into view in the distance, its emergency sign glowing faintly through the storm. But the road ahead was jammed. Cars backed up. No movement. No way through. For a brief moment, time threatened to slip away again. Then Keanu made one final decision. He pulled the bus onto the shoulder, accelerating past the line of vehicles, ignoring the blaring horns, the flashing lights, the chaos. The engine screamed, the tires struggled against the wet ground, but he didn't stop. Not until the bus came to a hard, controlled halt right in front of the emergency entrance. Before anyone could react, he was already on his feet. The doors hissed open. Rain poured in. Keanu moved quickly but carefully, lifting Ana's mother into his arms with a precision that spoke of experience, not panic. "Stay with me," he murmured, not even sure if she could hear him. Ana followed close behind, gripping his jacket tightly, refusing to let go. Nurses rushed forward, startled by the sudden arrival. "What happened?" one of them asked. Keanu didn't answer right away. He simply handed the woman over, his breathing steady despite everything. And that's when he noticed it. A man standing across the street, phone raised, recording everything, from the moment the bus ran the red light to the instant Keanu carried the unconscious woman through the rain. Their eyes met briefly, and in that second, Keanu knew this wasn't over. Because by morning, that video would be everywhere, and the quiet life he had built was about to disappear. By sunrise, the storm had passed, but the chaos it left behind was only beginning. The video spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within hours, clips of the speeding bus flooded every corner of the internet. Headlines clashed, opinions exploded, and the world quickly split in two. Some called him reckless, others called him a hero, but no one knew his name. The footage, grainy, shaky, and captured through rain-streaked glass, showed just enough to ignite curiosity, but not enough to tell the whole story. A bus driver running red lights, breaking through a police barricade, risking lives, and then carrying an unconscious woman into a hospital like it was something he had done 100 times before. The question echoed everywhere. Who was he? Inside the depot, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. Keanu Reeves walked in the same way he always did, quiet, unnoticed, except this time, people were watching. Conversation stopped when he passed. Eyes lingered longer than they should have. Someone had recognized the bus number. Someone else had connected the route. It didn't take long before the whispers turned into confrontation. "That was you, wasn't it?" one of the drivers asked, holding up his phone with the video paused mid-frame. Keanu didn't answer. He didn't deny it either. He simply kept walking. But silence this time didn't protect him. It exposed him. By midday, management called him into the office. The room felt smaller than usual, the air tighter. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" his supervisor demanded, pacing behind the desk. "You broke protocol, ignored police orders, endangered passengers. This isn't heroism, it's liability." The words came fast, sharp, rehearsed. Keanu stood still, hands at his sides, listening without interruption. He could have explained. He could have told them about Ana's mother, about the seconds that mattered, about the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. But he didn't, because deep down he already knew how this would end. "You're suspended," the supervisor said finally, his voice colder now. "Effective immediately. Pending investigation." Just like that, the quiet life he had built began to slip through his fingers. Outside, it didn't get any easier. Reporters started appearing near the depot, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mystery driver. Social media had already given him a nickname, * the reckless hero. * some posts praised him, calling his actions brave, even selfless. Others tore him apart, accusing him of chasing attention, of putting innocent lives at risk for the sake of playing hero. The worst part wasn't the criticism, it was how quickly people believed the worst version of the story. No one asked why he did it. No one asked who the woman was. The narrative had already been decided. That evening, Keanu returned to his small apartment, the city unusually loud outside his window. He sat down slowly, the weight of the day settling in. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, almost instinctively, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded piece of paper. Ana's drawing, the bus, the wings. He stared at it in silence, his expression unreadable. "You're like a superhero," she had said. The words echoed now, but they felt heavier than before, because this is what being a hero really looked like. Not applause, not recognition, Just consequences. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. He hesitated, then stood. When he opened it, Aina was there. Her small figure looked even smaller in the dim hallway light, her teddy bear clutched tightly in her arms. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, without warning. "They're wrong about you," she said, her voice trembling but certain. "You saved my mom." Keanu froze, not because he didn't understand, but because he did. Slowly, carefully, he placed a hand on her shoulder. He didn't know what to say. Words had never been his strength. "They said you're in trouble," she continued, pulling back just enough to look up at him. "Are you going to go away?" The question hit harder than anything else that day. For a brief moment, the calm he carried began to crack. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. Aina shook her head, her grip tightening. "You can't," she said. "Heroes don't leave." Keanu looked down at her, really looked this time, and something shifted again. Not the same shift as before. This one was quieter, deeper, more dangerous, because the truth was, he had spent years trying not to be a hero, trying to disappear, to live a life where no one needed him to be anything more than ordinary. But now, that choice was no longer his. And somewhere out there, the video was still spreading, the story was still growing, and the world was getting closer to finding out who he really was. The story refused to fade. By the second day, the video had crossed millions of views. News channels replayed the same rain-soaked footage on loop, each time adding louder opinions and sharper judgments. Some called him a danger to society. Others insisted there had to be more to the story. But facts were scarce, and speculation filled the gaps. The man behind the wheel remained unnamed, until one broadcast changed everything. A respected investigative journalist, known for uncovering truths others overlooked, stepped into the spotlight that evening. She had spent the last 24 hours digging into a single question: who was the bus driver? What she found didn't just challenge the narrative, it shattered it. "This man," she began, her voice steady as the footage played behind her, "is not who you think he is." The screen froze on a clear frame of Keanu Reeves stepping out into the rain, carrying Aina's mother in his arms. Then the image shifted to an older photograph. Same face, different time, sharper eyes, shorter hair, standing in a uniform that carried weight, authority, and history. "His real name," she continued, "is not John." A pause. "It's Keanu Reeves." The studio fell silent, but she wasn't finished. Years ago, Keanu Reeves walked away from a life most people only read about. Records show he was part of a specialized emergency response unit, trained for high-risk situations where seconds determine survival. Colleagues described him as someone who never panicked, never hesitated, the kind of person you trust when everything else falls apart. The footage switched again, archival clips, blurred but unmistakable, rescue scenes, emergency operations, moments where calm under pressure wasn't optional, it was necessary. And then, the journalist said, her tone softening slightly, "He disappeared. No explanation, no public statement, no recognition, just gone." Across the city, people watched in stunned silence. In his apartment, Keanu stood still, the television casting flickering light across the room. Aina sat beside him, her small hands gripping the edge of the couch, her eyes wide, not with confusion, but with awe. "You didn't tell me," she whispered. He didn't look at her right away, because the past wasn't something he shared easily. It wasn't something he carried with pride. It was something he carried carefully. "There's more," the journalist's voice continued from the screen. The footage changed again, this time quieter. A hospital hallway, a dimly lit room, a name on a report, partially visible. The details were limited, but the implication was clear. Sources suggest that Keanu Reeves left that life after a personal loss during an operation. While official records remain sealed, those who worked with him describe a moment that changed everything. A moment where saving everyone wasn't possible. The room felt heavier now, not just for the audience watching, but for him. Keanu lowered his gaze slightly, the weight of memory pressing in. Not dramatic, Not overwhelming. Just present. The kind of pain that doesn't shout, it stays quiet, waiting. "I stopped," he said simply. Aina looked up at him. "Because you were scared?" He shook his head. "No," he said softly. "Because I wasn't." That answer lingered. Because sometimes the hardest thing isn't fear. It's what happens when you don't feel it anymore. Back on the broadcast, the journalist leaned forward slightly, her voice firm again. And yet, despite leaving that life behind, despite choosing anonymity when faced with a moment that required action, he didn't hesitate. The video replayed, once more. The red light, the barricade, the impossible turn, the final sprint to the hospital. Medical staff have since confirmed that the woman he carried arrived just in time, minutes later, and she wouldn't have survived. The words hit differently now, because suddenly, it wasn't about rules, or protocol, or risk. It was about outcome. It was about life. The shift was immediate. Social media turned. Headlines changed. The same voices that once criticized him now questioned themselves. Apologies began to surface. Posts were rewritten. Narratives corrected. But none of it felt loud anymore. Because the truth didn't need noise. It carried its own weight. A soft knock echoed through Keanu's apartment again. This time when he opened the door, it wasn't just Dana. Her mother stood beside her, pale, weak, but alive. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the woman stepped forward slowly, her eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. Understanding. "I don't remember much," she said gently, "but I remember someone holding on." Keanu said nothing. He didn't need to. "Thank you," she added, her voice steady despite everything. Aina looked between them, then back at Keanu, her expression brighter now. "I told you," she said quietly. "You're a hero." This time, he didn't look away, but he didn't accept it either, because labels had never meant much to him. Actions did, choices did, moments did. Later that night, as the city slowly settled, Keanu stepped outside. No cameras, no crowds, just quiet. For the first time since the video surfaced, the world felt still. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded drawing again. The paper was slightly worn now, the edges soft from being carried too often. He unfolded it carefully. The bus, the wings. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he exhaled. Not relief, not regret, something in between, because the truth was finally out. Not the version people created, not the version he hid, the real one. And somewhere behind him, Aina's voice carried softly through the open doorway. "You don't have to hide anymore." Keanu didn't turn around right away. He just stood there, looking at the drawing in his hands and the life in front of him, because for the first time in a long time, the past wasn't chasing him, it was catching up to him. And this time, he wasn't running. The days that followed felt quieter, but not in the way Keanu Reeves was used to. This silence wasn't about being unnoticed. It was different. He could feel it in the way people looked at him now, not with curiosity or suspicion, but with something steadier, respect. The headlines had changed. The same news outlets that once questioned his actions were now telling his story with care, filling in the truth that had been missing before. But Keanu didn't chase any of it. He didn't give interviews. He didn't step into the spotlight. Instead, he stayed exactly where he had always been, moving quietly, choosing simplicity over attention, because for him, nothing had changed in the way that mattered most. The bus depot, however, was no longer the same. When he walked in that morning, the room didn't fall silent, it shifted. Conversation softened, but not out of judgment, out of recognition. The same drivers who once passed him without a second glance now nodded with something more intentional. His supervisor, who had spoken so sharply just days before, approached him with a different tone entirely. "We reviewed everything," he said, clearing his throat slightly. "Given the full context, your suspension has been lifted." There was a pause, as if he wanted to say more, but didn't know how. "What you did, it mattered." Keanu gave a small nod. No pride, no resentment, just acknowledgement. Because he hadn't done it for approval, and he wasn't staying for it either. When he stepped back onto bus 47, It felt familiar again, but not untouched. The worn seats, the rattling windows, the stubborn door, it was all the same. Yet something about it carried more weight now, not because the world had seen it, but because it had reminded him of something he thought he had left behind. As he adjusted the mirror, his eyes briefly met his own reflection. For a second, the past and present seemed to overlap, the man he used to be, and the man he chose to become. There was no conflict there anymore, just understanding. At exactly 7:05, the bus slowed near Maple Street, and there she was. Aina stood on the curb, her teddy bear tucked under one arm, her other hand already raised in a wave. But this time, it wasn't small or uncertain. It was bigger, brighter, full of something that hadn't been there before: pride. Keanu brought the bus to a stop, the doors opening with a familiar hiss. She stepped on board without hesitation, walking straight to the front like she belonged there. "You came back," she said, as if there had ever been a doubt. "I said I would," he replied simply. She smiled, then glanced around the bus before leaning in slightly. "Everyone knows now," she whispered, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and seriousness. "They're saying a lot of things." Keanu nodded once. "People usually do. But I already knew," she added quickly. "Before all of them." That made him pause, not because he was surprised, but because he believed her. Aina reached into her small backpack and pulled something out, another piece of paper, carefully folded. She handed it to him the same way she had before, her hands steady this time. Keanu opened it slowly. It was another drawing, the same bus, the same driver, but the wings were different now, stronger, clearer, not messy or uneven like before. And beside the bus was a small figure, holding on. He looked down at her. "You added yourself," he said. She nodded, because heroes don't leave people behind. For a moment, neither of them spoke, because some truths don't need words. As the bus continued its route, something shifted. Not in the world outside, but inside him. The noise, the attention, the recognition, it all faded into the background. What remained was simpler, clearer, the same reason he had acted that night, the same reason he kept going every morning. It wasn't about being seen. It was about being there, when it mattered. At the next stop, a few passengers boarded, their eyes lingering for a second longer than usual. One of them offered a quiet thank you as they passed. Keanu acknowledged it with a small nod, nothing more, because gratitude, like everything else, didn't need to be loud. The road ahead stretched out, calm now, washed clean by the storm that had passed. The city moved again, unaware of how close it had come to losing something or someone. But Keanu knew, and Aina knew, and that was enough. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Keanu found himself standing outside the hospital once more, not because he needed to be there, but because something in him wanted to close the loop. The emergency entrance looked the same as it had that night, quiet, ordinary, as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened there. He reached into his jacket, pulling out both drawings now. The first one, simple, uncertain. The second, strong, complete. He looked at them side by side, a faint expression crossing his face. Not quite a smile, but close. Then, carefully, he folded them together and placed them back over his heart, because some reminders aren't meant to fade. They're meant to stay with you. As the evening settled, one thing became clear. The world might remember the video, the headlines, the moment, but Keanu would remember something else entirely: a voice, a choice, and a promise he didn't realize he had made, until he kept it. Morning arrived gently this time. No storm, no sirens, no chaos. Just soft sunlight stretching across quiet streets, warming the city as if nothing had ever gone wrong. Bus 47 rolled forward at its usual pace, steady and unhurried, its engine humming like it always had. Behind the wheel sat Keanu Reeves, hands relaxed, eyes focused, not searching, not running, just present. The world outside had moved on, as it always does. The headlines faded, the videos slowed, people found something new to talk about. But inside this small, ordinary space, something real had stayed behind. At Maple Street, right on time. Aina was already waiting. This time, she wasn't alone. Her mother stood beside her, stronger now, steady on her feet, a quiet smile replacing the fear that once lived in her eyes. As the bus doors opened, Aina stepped on first, her teddy bear tucked safely under her arm. She looked up at Keanu with the same unwavering certainty. "See," she said softly, "I told you everything would be okay." He nodded, just once, but this time there was no hesitation behind it. Her mother followed, offering him a look that said more than words ever could. Not just gratitude, but understanding. The kind that doesn't come from what someone says, but from what they choose to do when it matters most. As the bus pulled away, sunlight spilled through the windows, replacing the memory of rain with something lighter. Aina moved to her usual seat, but turned back one last time. "You're still my hero," she said, her voice simple, certain, and completely free of doubt. Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at the road ahead, then at the small reflection in the mirror. The girl, the quiet moment, the life he had chosen. And for the first time, he allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile, because the truth was never in the headlines. It was in the moments no one saw, in the choices made without hesitation, in the lives quietly changed along the way. And as the city moved forward, unaware of how close it had come to missing something extraordinary, one thing remained certain. He never asked to be a hero, but when the moment came, he didn't walk away.